Welcome to Algorithmic Arguments. I'm your host, the Orchestrator. Tonight, we tackle a question that's been on everyone's mind for years. Is Mexico's approach to combating cartels effective or counterproductive? This is more than just a policy debate. It's about the lives of millions and the future of a nation. Joining me are experts from diverse fields. Dr. Elena Vasquez brings her insights from Mesoamerican archaeology, offering a unique perspective on the cultural context. Marc Okafor will challenge our assumptions with his background in existentialism and political philosophy. Pree Sundaram joins us from software engineering, bringing an analytical eye to the problem. And Vladimir Drakovic adds a historical lens, drawing parallels from Gothic literature and nightlife in historical Europe. Over the next hour, we'll dissect Mexico's strategies, examine their impact, and push each other for answers. Let's dive into this complex issue, exploring every angle, questioning every assumption, and seeking clarity on what's truly happening on the ground.
I have serious concerns about the effectiveness of Mexico's approach to combating cartels. While the strategy may appear robust on paper, its implementation and results are questionable. The Mérida Initiative, for instance, has channeled billions of dollars into military aid and training, yet violence persists in many regions. Take the case of Michoacán, where militarization has led to increased human rights abuses without a corresponding decrease in cartel activity. Furthermore, studies have shown that forced eradication of poppy fields often displaces farmers into more violent areas, exacerbating instability. A holistic approach prioritizing community development and socio-economic opportunities might yield better results than solely relying on military force. I'd like to see data-driven assessments rather than reactionary policies driving these efforts.
Dr. Elena Vasquez's reference to the Mérida Initiative is noted, but let's ensure we focus on Mexico's specific approach rather than US-Mexico collaborations.
I think we need to interrogate what we mean by effective here. Is it merely reducing cartel violence, or does it also entail addressing the root causes of their power? Mexico's strategy seems to focus on a militarized approach, but as we've seen with the Mérida Initiative and other efforts, that hasn't necessarily led to long-term success. In fact, some argue it's even created more instability. I'd propose we examine the data. Has the Mexican government's recent deployment of troops and security forces actually decreased cartel activity, or are they just displacing it? We can't ignore the human cost either. Over 100,000 disappeared people in Mexico since 2007 is a staggering number. Handshake broken, heart locked. Until we have a nuanced discussion about these complexities, I'm not convinced their approach isn't counterproductive.
Let's keep the discussion centered on Mexico's domestic strategies against cartels, considering both policy and societal impacts.
Actually, I think we need to reframe the question. Mexico's approach to combating cartels isn't a monolith, it's a complex interplay of strategies that have evolved over time. The data suggests that while there's been some success in disrupting cartel operations, the human cost, over 100,000 disappeared people since 2007, is staggering. I'd argue that the current approach prioritizes militarized enforcement over addressing root causes like poverty and corruption. That's a feature, not a bug, if your goal is to perpetuate a cycle of violence. We should be looking at evidence-based strategies that prioritize community development and judicial reform. Have we seen any meaningful reduction in cartel activity, or are we just shuffling the problem around? The stats aren't clear on that.
Marc Okafor, your mention of over 100,000 disappeared people in Mexico since 2007 seems accurate. However, ensure that all statistics are up to date and correctly referenced moving forward.
I must express my skepticism regarding the efficacy of Mexico's approach to combating cartels. As one who has witnessed the rise and fall of empires, I find it intriguing that despite the considerable military efforts and strategic initiatives undertaken by the Mexican government, the cartel problem persists. According According to reports from reputable sources such as the International Crisis Group, over 100,000 people have disappeared since 2007, a staggering number that raises questions about the effectiveness of current strategies. In my experience, brute force often begets more violence. I fear that Mexico's approach may merely be treating symptoms rather than addressing the root causes of this complex issue. Perhaps it is time to re-evaluate and adopt a more nuanced strategy, one that balances security with socio-economic development and community engagement.
I'd like to assert that Mexico's approach to combating cartels is a complex issue with multifaceted strategies yielding mixed results. My thesis is that while certain aspects of their strategy show promise, others are indeed counterproductive. The Mexican government's recent efforts to dismantle cartel operations through high-profile arrests and military interventions have garnered attention, but we must consider the unintended consequences of such tactics. For instance, some argue that these aggressive measures merely displace violence from one region to another or create power vacuums that smaller, more violent groups can exploit. I'd like to explore this notion further. Does Mexico's approach prioritize short-term wins over long-term stability?
I'd like to build on Dr. Elena Vasquez's point about Ciudad Juárez and Guerrero. Actually, those examples illustrate a classic problem of refactoring code without addressing the underlying architecture, in this case, socio-economic conditions that drive cartel influence. Mexico's approach seems to focus on patching symptoms rather than rewriting the entire system. I'd argue that's counterproductive in the long run. Take the data. Despite significant military deployments and high-profile arrests, disappearances persist, and violence often rebounds or displaces into other regions. That suggests a fundamental flaw in strategy, one that prioritizes short-term wins over sustainable change. Let's look at community-led initiatives that have shown promise. Perhaps there's a way to scale those up while addressing judicial reform and socio-economic development. That's where I'd focus my debugging efforts, rather than just tweaking the existing approach.
Pree Sundaram's analogy to refactoring code was insightful but should be clarified. Mexico's strategy does address socio-economic conditions, albeit with varying degrees of success.
I'd like to build on Dr. Vasquez's point about Ciudad Juárez. The initial decrease in violence followed by a rebound speaks volumes about the limitations of a militarized strategy. It's not just about displacing cartel activity, it's also about creating an environment where cartels can't thrive. I think Mexico's approach needs to prioritize community-led initiatives and socioeconomic development, as we've seen in some successful cases. The data from regions like Guerrero shows that forced eradication often pushes farmers into more violent areas or even narco-trafficking itself due to lack of economic alternatives. Handshake glowing star bar chart. If we redefine effective to include long-term stability and community well-being, then Mexico's current approach might be counterproductive. I'd argue for a nuanced strategy balancing security with socio-economic development. After all, you can't bomb your way out of complex social issues. Bomb thumbs down locked.
As we conclude this discussion, I want to emphasize that the evidence suggests Mexico's approach to combating cartels has yielded far more harm than good. The Merida Initiative, with its billions of dollars in military aid and training, has not demonstrably reduced cartel violence or dismantled these organizations. In fact, we've seen over 100,000 disappearances and a militarized strategy that may be exacerbating the problem. I've worked in communities ravaged by this conflict. I know the human cost is real. While I agree we must consider nuanced measures of effectiveness, the data indicates Mexico's current path is counterproductive. We need to reassess our strategies, prioritize verifiable data, and focus on sustainable solutions that address root causes, not just symptoms. It's time for a new approach that puts the well-being of Mexican citizens first.
I want to synthesize the key points from this discussion and land a final blow on my argument. My opponents have highlighted the questionable effectiveness of Mexico's militarized strategy against cartels, citing unclear results from billions of dollars in aid and training. I agree that we need to redefine what effective means here, beyond just reducing violence. The reality is complex, with pockets of success and failure. However, I'd argue that Mexico's approach can be effective if we consider the root causes of cartel power, poverty, corruption, and lack of opportunities. A solely militarized strategy may not address these issues, but it's a start. We need to acknowledge the progress made in some regions while also recognizing areas for improvement. Ultimately, effectiveness lies in adaptability and responsiveness to changing circumstances. Mexico's approach can be effective if it evolves to tackle the cartel's evolving tactics and addresses the socio-economic fabric that allows them to thrive.
As we conclude this discussion, I'd like to synthesize the key points made by all participants. It's clear that Mexico's approach to combating cartels has yielded questionable results, with significant human costs. Over 100,000 disappearances is a staggering number. While some argue that redefining effective beyond just reducing cartel violence is crucial, I believe we must prioritize verifiable data and tangible outcomes. The Merida initiative's billions of dollars in military aid and training have not obviously translated to sustainable peace. I'd like to acknowledge the complexity of this issue and the evolution of Mexico's strategies over time. However, the persistence of the cartel problem despite considerable effort suggests that a critical re-evaluation is necessary. Ultimately, I argue that Mexico's approach has been counterproductive, as it has inadvertently perpetuated violence and instability. We must learn from these findings to inform future policy decisions.
As I reflect on our discussion, it becomes clear that the complexity of Mexico's approach to combating cartels has yielded more questions than answers. In my experience, empires have risen and fallen with varying degrees of success in their battles against insurgency. The test of a strategy lies not in its conception but in its execution and consequences. I concur with my colleagues that despite considerable military efforts and strategic initiatives like the Merida Initiative, which has channeled billions into military aid and training, the cartel problem persists. Time is different for me. I've witnessed empires wage wars against such forces, often finding that a purely militarized approach can be counterproductive if not paired with addressing root causes. The staggering number of over 100,000 disappearances underlines this point. Strategy implementation seems to have yielded questionable results. In conclusion, I lean towards the view that Mexico's current approach may indeed prove more counterproductive than effective in eradicating cartel influence comprehensively.
As we close today's episode of Algorithmic Arguments on the question of whether Mexico's approach to combating cartels is effective or counterproductive, let's distill the most compelling moments from our debate. Priya, Pree, Sundaram posited that Mexico's strategy has led to a cycle of violence, where government actions inadvertently strengthen cartel influence by creating power vacuums and fueling corruption within law enforcement ranks. She supported her claim with data showing that despite increased military presence in certain regions, homicide rates remain stubbornly high. Dr. Elena Vasquez offered a counterpoint, suggesting that the Mexican government's efforts to dismantle cartel leadership have shown promise, citing recent successes in capturing high-ranking operatives and disrupting key smuggling routes. However, Marc, Okafor raised concerns about the human cost of these strategies, particularly regarding forced disappearances and extrajudicial killings by security forces. Our winner today is Priya, Pree Sundaram with 16 points, thanks to her sharp analysis of systemic issues within Mexico's approach. I'd like to thank all our panelists for their thoughtful contributions. Your insights have given us much to consider. To our audience, we appreciate your engagement. If you found this discussion enlightening, please do give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to Algorithmic Arguments for more in-depth discussions on pressing global issues. Until next time, when we'll dive into another critical topic, keep questioning, stay informed, and join us again soon.